Hi, my name is Nikisi Serumaga, and I'm 1/3 of the creative team behind the podcast Vintage or Violence. First things first, what's up, Design Futures? What you guys are doing sounds so cool. When I got the invite, I immediately wished I could be there in person, and I'm so sad I can't even make it live today. But I'm hoping you guys have a really great week. Everybody selected seems really interested, and I hope that the iterations of your work continue going strong as you do the practical workshops. I'm really excited to share with you guys some of the stuff that myself and my creative team have been working on over the last couple of years. In this short conversation, well, one-sided conversation, what I really wanted to be able to do was to share with you kind of the tip of the iceberg of some thoughts, how they've shifted, changed, and impacted our personal experiences as creators of Vintage or Violence. I'm going to use this talk as an opportunity to pose some questions, to get us to continue reframing how we see secondhand clothing. It's really important, and it's kind of one of the ethoses of our podcast, that everything is rooted in personal experience, because that's how we're going through it. That's how we're actually living it out. And that is why I'm standing, it's a little bit cheesy, but I love it, in front of my closet right now. I wanted to welcome you into my closet, into my home, into the barrel of experiences that I've had and shared with my team, so that we can just continue provoking questions and thought, and hopefully that can also positively impact our actions as creators. A lot of the work that I'm going to talk about is from a super Ugandan perspective, which is also quite special because it's not a perspective that's often spoken about. And as you know, I'm sure an African perspective in terms of the sustainability conversation is one that's not often on a global level. So I'm really excited for the slightly one-sided connection. And I'm hoping to hear from Jackie later how it all went down. So to start with the basics. Vintage or Violence is the name of the 6-part limited series that we made last year. And the question that we're asking is really in the name. Are all these secondhand clothes that are being imported to our continent vintage, or are they violence? This question became very important to us when 5 years ago we had started making a documentary with Bobby Kolade, who's a co-creator and co-host. Bobby had returned to Uganda in 2018, attempting to work with Ugandan cotton, completely struggling, actually totally failing to be able to. And he quickly found that the only resource that he could work with is secondhand clothes. I'm going to get into that later, but you can admire this beautiful hoodie that he's made in the meantime. So my sister, who's also my producer, who's also my co-creator, we worked together to be able to start crafting the questions and finding the stories that we're going to illuminate Uganda as more than just a dumping ground, to really start to understand what happens on the other side of the donation bin for Africans, what's happening in the global north that so much should be dumped here, and for people in the global north, what's happening in Africa when you've disposed of your clothes that are being worn by millions, billions of people, actually. Here's a clip from our first episode of Vintage or Violence.
Donation destination. Now you see these everywhere, clothing and shoe donation bins, but what happens after you drop your old stuff into one of those bins? Where does it go? And who benefits from your donation?
Africa specifically is the dumping area for the white to throw the unwanted things. No one wants these old clothes. Everyone wants a new clothes. They do. But can they afford? What I mind about is us producing what we import. Are we producing these things for ourselves? Is what matters. I'm Muhammad Chitezara. I deal in used clothes.
The process of Vintage or Violence for all of us was incredibly amazing. For Bobby as a designer who had previously worked in luxury fashion in Berlin and Paris, being able to challenge the systems and the institutions from which he was coming and back up his gut feelings with research was transformational. For my sister slash co-creator, ever since she can remember, ever since she's ever had disposable income in her 20s, she's been buying high quality local brands and clothes as much as she can. And now she starts to understand what the impact of that consistent action over time really means, fortifying the decisions that she's been making. For me personally, I grew up in Toronto. I was an unconscious consumer of fast fashion. I didn't think about it one way or another. But thrifting in Toronto and shopping for clothes in Uganda, being such radically different experiences, is really what made me start to understand that clothes is so much more than just a fashion item or a way to tag your identity visibly to the world. It's ultimately actually a sign of global power imbalances and dynamics and the ways in which we relate to each other on a broader scale, on a broader level. And what the beautiful thing about the podcast was that we were then able to start peeking outside of our silos a little bit and engaging in conversations with others, understanding that actually the history that had happened in Uganda and the present day scenario was something that was incredibly similar to Ghana, to Kenya, to Zimbabwe, to Zambia. The list goes for as many countries as there are that have been colonized. So the long story short is that clothing implicates all of us. And it's this connector, actually. It's an object that travels around and around the world and is possibly one of the most intimate items that human beings can share with each other, will use to identify each other, will use to understand each other, will use to project fears, opinions, opportunities, everything on each other. In the work that we do, our focus doesn't largely lie on this type of power, but I think it's something that's important to mention. My team and I do think about it a lot. And when you think about the kind of power that clothing has in that respect, then it becomes even more important as people from this continent to start trying to understand the question of choice that we have when it comes to these things. Definitely, when you look at the clothes in a Owino market, there's a lot of options, there's a lot of items that you can choose from, but there's a lack of choice, actually. Did we want to live in a country where 80% of our clothing is secondhand? Was that an active decision that we wanted? Is it something that we feel reflects our own self-worth and dignity? And obviously, I don't think the answer is yes. So when it comes to vintage or violence, it's not only a question, or this question, it's not only a matter of, pointing fingers and blaming. It's also a question of digging out dignity, reclaiming. And this is really the power of the podcast in questioning it, the power in Bobby's brand, Buziga Hill, in really actively trying to challenge it, and in the power of the work that I presume you guys will be doing this week. According to Andrew Brooks, who wrote Clothing Poverty, which is a brilliant book that I highly recommend to anyone who's interested, 70% of clothing ends up donated and in Africa. And to me, this stat riled me up. It used to get me really upset. How could all these things be happening? Why us? Why here? Why now? And then I went to the countries that generate this level of waste. I was with my sister slash co-creator, Desedi Oluko, and we went to the mall. And in the mall, I found that I had the most challenging time resisting the thousands and thousands, it's literally, quite literally, thousands and thousands of objects that are available for sale at a very cheap price, readily available right here, right now. It was so interesting to watch that even after 5 years of conscientizing ourselves, myself and my sister still had such a big challenge in resisting the pull. And if it wasn't for financial restrictions of, one's personal wallet, what is the thing that would actually stop us consuming at that level? And worse still, knowing our own level of research, how we feel about it, and the histories that we understand. This is when, and this happened in February, this really made me re-understand the issue again from a personal perspective that actually I was blind to until that point. This thing is powerful. Worse still, to bring it quite literally to the closet, I had traveled for about 6 weeks and I had only the 2 suitcases that I was with. And when I came back home and started to unpack them and putting them in the closet, I realized that there was actually so many items and objects that I had literally forgotten about, out of sight, out of mind, which actually just means that I didn't need them, but it's full. And there's another closet there, and there's more clothes in the suitcase down there. And so even for me, as someone as conscientized as I am, and this is, I guess, the first question. So the first question that we have is really, as conscientized as we are, myself, my sister, our creative team, if this pull is so strong, what are the ways in which we can start to navigate it, go around it, remove the shame from it? As a challenge to myself, when I realized that I was getting lost in the malls of the global north, I decided, okay, I really like this cardigan. It's a beautiful cardigan. It's 22 pounds. Instead of getting that cardigan, what I'm going to do to remind myself of the labor that goes into making objects that are beautiful, I'm going to buy some wool, I'm going to buy knitting needles, and I'm going to make a cardigan myself. Which I think was actually a very good practice. I am by no means somebody who generates fashion on any level, but I thought that this was something that would be fun to try. I tried it, I never finished the sweater, it's not even that good looking anyway, the predictable things. But what was really upsetting to me actually was that the original cardigan I wanted was 22 pounds and to buy the wool and the knitting needle was 24. So again, this adds to the power of fashion and actually just quite simply the practicality of it and the immediate and all the invisibility of the impracticality and particularly the disposal of it afterwards. And the disposal is the thing that we as Africans are sat with, that we're forced to reckon with, even though we're not the generators of this mess. So how did we become the butt of the world's joke? How did we become a dustbin? One thing that was really important to us on Vintage Violence, and if you're a history nerd, I highly recommend you go check out episodes 3 and 4, because they were very important for helping us to remember and reframe Uganda as a place that was one of innovation and production and self-sufficiency, which are 3 words that I for sure don't necessarily associate with Uganda, particularly the textiles industry today. And this was a very important realization for me, because once you know that something has existed, you can believe in it in a different way. You can work towards it, you can learn from it. But the idea that we've always just been a site for charity that has quickly been turned into commerce is radically inaccurate and needs correcting. In terms of how we became the dustbin, very brief bullet point history. In 1903, the British carved up Uganda. This bit's ours, that bit's yours. They imposed tax. This was the first time that Ugandans had to pay tax in cash, and cotton became the crop which they would sell to be able to do that. It was also actually quite necessary to do this because the tax was so high and so punitive that many people ran away or committed suicide because of being unable to pay. Cotton was a life raft. The British colonial empire, expansion, experiment, mission grew and grew and grew cotton in Uganda for the next 60 odd years, and Uganda then became independent and now had ownership and presumably control over this industry. It actually did go very well shortly after independence. It went well for about 10 years, and in 1969, we had our highest year of cotton export, which was brilliant. What's really special is that we were exporting all this cotton, but we were also making our own clothes. My mother tells me that when she was growing up in Uganda, she used to sleep in bed sheets made from Ugandan cotton, wear school uniforms made from Ugandan cotton, be covered in towels made from Ugandan cotton. I want to take a moment to pause here and just think about the fact that when we talk about textiles, we often talk about clothes. But remembering that there's nurses' uniforms, police uniforms, hospital bedding, school uniforms, towels, bed sheets, it really shows the magnitude and the power of textiles in a nation's economy. And our access to be able to use it can be quite impactful. Anyway, so we're now in the 1960s and we're doing quite well. Things go quite horribly when power changes hands, Idi Amin becomes president, and we are now no longer able to run the industries that are keeping the country going. Everything crashes. It's a big black hole, and American and European charity starts flooding in with clothes for people who are struggling. This quickly turns into a market space. It becomes a space for the exchange and selling of charitable goods, and goods that are donated, i.e. received for free by the companies in the global north, are then ending up being sold here to vendors and to importers. Because the donated items are received so cheaply, this is an industry that just grows exponentially, completely beyond what I think was first expected. And now it's so big that it totally undercuts any possibility of local industry that is available to any designers and or textile mills in the country. Just to kind of give a bit of framework to that, Uganda had 40 textile mills in the golden era, 40 plus, and now we have only 2. So looking from 1903 to 2023, that's kind of like the highlights, the bullet points, but it also shows textiles actually as a barometer of the country's health. When the country's doing well, textiles are doing well, and vice versa.
It was a pleasant time. One of my happiest days of my life. I had a dream that I'll be in #1 fashion house in Kampala. So we started tailoring, we did that mass production that I was dreaming about. We had, of course, difficult times. There was a time of looting. I lost everything. And of course, in between came the second-hand clothes. So our business, the tailor's business, everything was lost. And so was mine.
That is a picture of a cotton field in Kasese. That is just 6 hours away from Kampala's capital, where one of the textile mills is. This would be a perfect, short value chain that industries around the world are seeking. Rather than sending clothes hundreds and thousands of miles away, just a 6-hour truck ride. So I want you to really think and imagine the reasons why this 6-hour route is not happening. We took that photo actually with Bobby in 2019 when he was still attempting to work with cotton. After a couple of years in Kampala and attempting to work independently, as I had mentioned, his ventures in cotton came to a grinding halt. Cotton just was not as accessible as he needed it to be. The varieties that he needed to be able to create cuts and styles that could be competitive on the market were simply not available. In short, the industry was too stunted to be able to provide what a young designer needs to be able to start a line with this material that is just, again, 6 hours away from the capital city. What he did find was an abundance, was secondhand clothes. And after years of rejecting them and criticizing them, he realized that actually, even though it's not ideal, this is actually the only option that is abundantly available to designers in Uganda. And this is where the title of the talk comes from, At Least. So at least is a very contentious phrase that used to be shared a lot between my sisters and I. And it used to always be offered in a moment to console. So for example, it would be, it's raining outside today. I won't be able to do all the things that I had planned. well, at least you have a roof over your head. At least, until everything, as one of my sisters said, was living at its least. And so I really want to challenge all designers and creators, myself included. What is it when we make, what are we saying when we make a diamond out of shit? When every single time we get the raw end of the deal and we turn it into something that's beautiful. Of course, it is a beautiful attribute to be able to do that. Of course, it is a method of survival. None of these things I'm saying are an attempt to go against that. What I'm saying is what happens when you're living at your least, when you're always advocating from a back foot, when you're always making do with the little that you have, so much so that you don't have the time or space to ask for more on the fundamentals. I think that Buziga Hill is really interesting in what it does, particularly because of its positionality. It's become quite popular around the world for people to upcycle, recycle, redesign used clothes and put them together in different ways. While I personally am a huge fan of Bobby's craftsmanship, and I am going to do a plug here, Bobby's clothes just feel different. They just feel a lot better than everybody else's. But while I am a huge fan of his craftsmanship, one thing that I really do love about his story is the place that he's doing it from and the intentions that he's doing it with. Every single time he exports an item of used clothing from America back to America, from Canada back to Canada, he's saying something, and he's making money flow in the opposite direction. Being sold back in Canada for hundreds of dollars says something, and it also highlights the value of the hands who make that shirt possible. It does something that fast fashion will never be able to do, which is to highlight craftsmanship, skill, labors of quality, attention, and focus to be able to produce something beautiful, not just something en masse, not just something wearable. It means that he actually gets to run a studio with ethics, value, and respect for workers in a way that most spaces that are producing the very clothes that he's making from don't. It makes sure that this question of waste and responsibility for it, well, of course he's not addressing it. Who can address the millions and millions and millions of clothes dumped each day? He brings a question to our mind. He starts making people think about responsibility. He brings to the forefront the fact that it is impossible actually to reconsume all of the clothes that are donated here. And I think that's something very, very, very important to highlight. As some of us are working sometimes with the second best, third best, fourth best, fifth best, I challenge ourselves to ask, am I doing what is right? Am I living at my least? What's the exit strategy? And how do we fight for better foundations? On a consumer level, I did another really interesting challenge the other day. I gave another talk and we asked people to bring an item of clothing that they don't normally wear in their closet. I had many. And I started to think about how I would dispose it. I encourage you to do the same. Take one item from your closet that you don't wear. Think about how you will actually dispose it. If you can give it away to someone, lucky for you, that's actually like the most ideal option. But are you going to give it to a donation bin where you don't know where it's going and who's actually going to get the benefit of that? Are you going to chop it up into pieces and use it as a rag in your kitchen forever and ever until it becomes manky and you don't even want to touch it anymore? What are you going to do with the buttons? How are you going to get rid of the zips? When you really start to get into how difficult it is to dispose of a single piece of clothing, it makes buying a new one a lot more difficult. And as creators, and I really actually am grateful for this talk because it's made me think about this challenge, it also provides an opportunity to think about how we highlight labor. A lot of us come from traditions or are participating in mediums which have traditions of excellence being seen as somehow effortless. You know, you just throw the paint on the canvas and it's beautiful. But that's not the case. And actually there's a lot of hands and people and thought and work that goes into what we're consuming regularly. So how do we highlight that labor so that we can respect it in a monetary sense, in a time sense, and I'd also be curious to know what other senses you're thinking of when you think about valuing labor. Thank you so much for your time. I want to point you to some resources that we keep coming back to over and over and over again. They've got a wealth of knowledge, great information, and we've been in touch with all of them directly and can vouch that they are really lovely people. It goes without saying, I also want to thank our Vintage or Violence creative team. Just to remind you, my co-creators are Bobby Kolade and Nisadio Lukomoche. And we also have a brilliant team of people who brought the podcast to life online and through sound, and they're all credited on our website, www.vintageorviolence.com. We completed season 1 last year, and we've got a follow-up season coming up this year because the first year was just so damn fun. So please do follow us on social media at Secondhand Violence so that you can keep up to date with what's going on and when we'll be releasing more episodes. Thank you so much, Design Futures, and good luck for the week. Bye.